Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 3 of Capacity Building with the Acosta Institute. Maria here, and I'm joined by Drisana. Hi, Drew.
Hey.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about capacity building within the Acosta Institute, and we'll be sharing from our unique perspectives of working within the Institute and what that's like. And we thought it would be fun to give you a little bit behind the scenes, sneak peek of the way that we're building capacity as a team and also individually. Before we get started, hi, Drew. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be recording our 3rd episode.
Me too. It's fun that it's just us and we get to take up all the space.
Yeah, for sure.
So Drew and I have had the unique and beautiful opportunity of being the first 2 apprentices of the Acosta Institute. I started back in 2020 and Drew started in 2021. So over the last 5 years, we've had a myriad of experiences and opportunities for growth and learning different ways of working and really learning different ways of building our capacities. So we're going to be sharing from that unique perspective today, how we came to this work and how we've grown and evolved within this work over the last 5 years. So I came to this work and particularly finding Angel and his work in 2020 when I was transitioning out of the classroom. I was teaching public school in New York City. I was a high school science teacher, and I was really making this movement towards really focusing on mental health, social emotional learning, and mindfulness in the classroom. And I got to a certain point where I just knew it was so important and so critical for me to do this work that it was the work of my purpose. And the environment and conditions in which I was in didn't quite allow me to fully step into that. So I made the decision to leave the classroom. And in this transition, I needed community. So I remember literally doing a Google search and I typed in New York City healing. And one of the search results was New York City Healing Collective, which is the podcast that Angel and Dolores, Angel's sister, were doing together. And I remember listening to an episode of Angel and Dr. Stephen Murphy Shigematsu talking about heartfulness in education. And I just had that experience of, I found my people. This is the work I need to be doing. These are people who are already doing the work. And this deep sense of affirmation that I was on the right path. So that summer of 2020, Angel was hosting community groundings. After the murder of George Floyd, he was hosting the community groundings every other week. And I was pulling up to those like it was my medicine. And, I started to follow his work a little bit more closely. I took a few of the trainings he was offering, particularly contemplating 400 years of inequality. And I just started to gain this sense of confidence that the work that I want to do in the world and in education was possible. And being in that community grounding, being surrounded by other educators who were so committed to healing-centered work was building my capacity. So just being part of the community alone was, I think, the first time where I really felt my capacity being built as an educator and as a healing-centered educator. Fast forward to the end of 2020, I ended up launching my own passion project called the Thriving Teacher Project, where I basically copied Angel and what he was doing out of deep inspiration. And I started hosting community circles and community support groups for teachers. And Angel collaborated with me, and we began working together then. And after a year of me doing that work, eventually Angel invited me to become an apprentice of the Acosta Institute. And, I started really small. I started off doing Zoom hosting and helping with some admin tasks, and uh, really getting to see the work from a different lens and getting to really, really, really grow with the Acosta Institute community. And as I say that, I'm literally envisioning some of our community members, the people that have been rolling with us for years. And it brings so much joy to my heart because there's so many beautiful educators, consultants, leaders doing this work as well alongside us, really. So part of being an apprentice with the Institute was really getting support around my work and my ideas. So I was encouraged and coached to create a framework around what I was already doing with the Thriving Teacher Project and really put language and shape to the work that I was doing. And in a sense, that built my capacity in feeling confident that the work that I'm doing is important, the work that I'm doing matters, and there's a particular way to frame it and talk about it such that other people can understand it and it can be shared and it can be taught. So I designed my first framework, and it's called the Thriving Educator Model. I really discovered that framework just by reflecting on the work that I was already doing. And I think that's such a gift of the way we work together. It's a constant reminder that your wisdom is already within you. The work that you're doing lives within your body, it lives within your bones. And we have created a way to just be mirrors for each other, to sort of dig up the work, dust it off. So I think the early phases of the apprenticeship were really, really critical for me building my confidence in myself, that my work matters, that my work is important, and that it makes a difference. I definitely struggle with confidence, especially in this field. I'm surrounded by brilliant, let me tell you, the most brilliant of all is sitting across from me right now on this screen. But brilliant thought leaders, authors, researchers, speakers. And so for someone like me to sort of emerge into this field of healing-centered education, having left the classroom, it was really, really important for me to have that foundation of confidence that I can keep doing this work and that I can be a contribution and that people can contribute to me. So building my capacity and confidence was really, really a major, major key for me in the apprenticeship. So after being an apprentice for 2 years, I then transitioned to becoming an internal consultant within the team. And then last year, I became the managing director within the Institute. And the way that we do the work is slow. It's with integrity. It's putting well-being first. And it's emergent. And we're constantly learning in relationship. Yes, we're also learning theory. We're learning best practices. We're learning ways to grow businesses. But we're also learning in relationship. And I think that's my favorite thing about working within the Acosta Institute. And I think that's the most important capacity that I've built in this work. I've had years of career and teaching under my belt, but it's only within this work that learning in relationship has been such an important piece of how I do the work that I do. We touched on this in episode 2, but the way that we can do this work in a different paradigm of doing work slowly, never feeling rushed to produce something, and always being given the space to cultivate. That's how it feels. Coming from the classroom, every single minute of the day was accounted for. Passing periods, you have 3 minutes to get to your next classroom, 5 minutes to start your lesson, 10 minutes to do this, 5 minutes to transition. Every single minute was accounted for. And that conditioned me to have a really, really funky relationship with time and producing and getting things done by a certain time. And what I've discovered and learned in working in the way that we do is my best work comes when I'm given the space to cultivate it. And we're given so much space to do that. We're given so much space to learn things that deeply interest us and to weave it into the work. And that's been a really, really important capacity for me, not just professionally, but personally and spiritually as well. So I'll wrap there. Being an apprentice was a gift. It was the best professional training I've received, and I've done hundreds of hours of professional development. It was such a natural process as well. And it also connected me to some of my favorite people. And with that, I'll pass it over to Drew to share her experience and her wisdom and perspective on that journey.
Okay, thank you for that. When you were talking, I was taking a lot of notes because I was just remembering so much. And I think that where to start, I think I really want to start at naming, just in relationship to what you said, that relationship does build capacity. I really strongly believe that it builds capacity and it also builds trust. For me, that's really important because I came from environments where I worked for years where it was always a lot of tension and mistrust and expectations around time. And, just coming to work with Acosta Institute has literally healed so much of some of the harm that I experienced, a tremendous amount. I'm just going to call it that harm, that I think that a lot of people still, have to reckon with. And so I feel very fortunate to work with Acosta Institute and also carry a lot of what I've learned into whomever I work with. So I'll tell you how it started for me was, one day I in the middle of the day, I decided to watch a talk at the Garrison. It was Angel in conversation with Dan Siegel, because what I was looking for as I was soon wrapping up my master's degree is, who is working at the intersection of social justice and spirituality. And, I think that we could more accurately say, the intersection of social justice and healing. But given that my program was in, women, gender, spirituality, and social justice, spirituality is a pretty big part of how I feel that this work is. At least I needed to see a Black person doing this work. I know who was doing it, but I needed to see someone that looked like me. I would look at all of these, that will come out talking about summits and conferences, and there'd be 1 to 2 Black people. And I was just like, okay, who's doing this and how do I make my way there? Because intuitively I knew that is the way that I sort of wanted to work, right? In that field, being in a place where I can speak, talk, present. I didn't know it then as much as I know it now, but that's how I ended up at the Garrison event. So I remember in that event, Dr. Sarat King was in there. I was sitting there watching, just watching these people, and I'm like, this is amazing. My job then was a remote job. So it was the first time I'd been spending a lot of time on Zoom, but I'd never really been in a space where I saw like something like that had like 2 pages of people. And the conversation was great. And so I reached out, and I was really nervous, actually, just because, I'm coming from a 20-year career that's totally different from this. And at the time, I was working for a really troubled organization. So I was just a little nervous, like feeling kind of like a fish out of water, but I just wanted to learn more about what he was doing. I told him what I was doing, told him I was working on my master's degree, told him why I was attending that event, and then somehow ended up discussing the fact that I have a summer internship that I need to take, or a class that I need to take. I need to work with some organization for this class that I was in on vocation and passion. And so Angel was like, oh, yeah, well, you could actually help with, you could support the summit that we're doing. We're doing a Healing-Centered Education Summit. And I was like, okay. I didn't really know what that meant, but I was like, all right. So I had my, got all the paperwork done. I had my internship. And then Angel also invited me to join the Healing-Centered Education Collective, which was, most people were, everybody was a student. Most folks in that group were working on their PhDs. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, like in this group of like 6 or 7 people, and like talking about books. And I was like, oh my gosh, these people are like, I didn't even know everyone was working in education necessarily, but there was that sort of that through line of maybe it's healing, maybe it's deep regard for the work. But I just remember thinking, like you said, I was like, ooh, I think I found my people. Like, and I also felt very much out of place, I must admit, because I was a master's student. I'm older than most people. Like, I returned to school in my 30s, So I remember feeling a little nervous. And then bit by bit, it just started to make so much sense as to why I was there. Learning so much with the group, and realizing like how essential spaces like that are for scholars of color. It just became apparent to me, like the further along I went in it, and I was doing that for a couple of years, actually, the more I realized how important it was that aspiring like PhDs or people that, looking to get their graduate degrees have a circle of support. It's so interesting I felt so not alone in this group. And it was also really special because I realized that we all had a certain way of being with the work. Like it was, I don't even know how to put words to it, but it's like, oh, I've landed in the right place. It's a bit like a miracle, right? To be like surrounded. And now some of those people are like some of my dearest friends as well. So, so that summer, some of the things that I did was research around the summit, research around, what are the books, like some of the speakers that were going to be there, what have they written, or have they been on podcasts, those sorts of things, which I absolutely loved doing. The other thing is I shared with Angel about the framework, and then that's how you and I met, of course. He's like, oh, I really would, you can share about the framework on the podcast. And I'm like, really? And it really, I remember the first time I presented at a community grounding, I was so nervous, but it really helped me to really believe in myself, to trust that I actually have something, right? And also his willingness to mentor, his willingness to listen, his way of affirming was critical for me. Between that and the HCC collective, like it was all critical for me, especially coming out of that organization where I was so misaligned. There was so much harm. I heard something today, or I read something today, and I wish I could cite her because we don't cite Black women enough, but she said something along the lines of, I don't believe that any Black women have imposter syndrome. They're just in organizations that don't let them show up as their full self. And that is exactly what I experienced in that organization that I left. I remember being kind of devastated And now I look back and I'm like, that is one of the best gifts I ever had, because it was extremely painful being in an organization that was actually Black led, where I experienced a lot of harm. Being in an organization that was that felt so much like the other toxic environments I came from, to land here where it felt like home, and where there's never a time that I can't bring my entire self, right? It's like, Melissa Harris Perry talks about standing straight in a crooked room. That organization was crooked, and when I got here, it was really like, even at our summit, yes, the community, everyone, I was like, what is the community groundings? I'm like, what has happened? It's just such a gift. So I feel like the types of capacities I built was, like you, confidence. Huge. It's huge when you're coming from a place where you've experienced any kind of harm or trauma, that you can actually believe that you have something to offer, right? And that was so clear. Even when I didn't feel confident about where I was in my degree, all of my colleagues and friends in that group were like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, it was just such a healing experience. So, and that's important, I think, in order to go do any kind of work in the world. The other thing that I remember is, because I did research, Angel and I would talk, he'd say, can you look into this? Can you look into this? And I love research. And of course, I was working on my master's degree, so it was perfect. It's like everything went together. We started looking at slow work, and slow work actually became the subject of my master's thesis, right? Looking at like womanism and slow work, the womanist way of working. And so it's, again, like, just this idea of, there was a way I felt like he knows, I should say, how to tap into our gifts and then give us room to experiment, right? And learn and play with those gifts. There's a lot of space, like you said. There's a lot of spaciousness. I feel like one of the things that I also recognize of being a part of Acosta Institute and our team and our community is that we all bring such different gifts, and they are all celebrated, right? They're all celebrated. There's no weird hierarchy. We can show up as entire human beings. I'm going to talk about my children. I'm going to talk about a client, some work I'm doing. We just live into the work so beautifully. Yeah. So then, you and I, for example, like teaching the primer together, also having the framework Alchemy of Now, I feel like just teaching the primer also made it very clear to me, kind of like what you said, that everyone really has a framework inside of them. And that's back to unique gifts. That's back to lived experience. And so again, I think that also motivates and forms this idea of capacity, right? Like, just this idea of, our lived experiences and our unique gifts are also very much connected to like what we can know, and perhaps what we can frame for others to live through or think through. So yeah, just so much growth. I feel so fortunate. It's been 4 years, just learned so much. And so now, of course, I'm working in the capacity of researcher and curriculum designer, although there's so much more to it now, right? Like, there's so much more that emerges. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things too. Like, we all talk together and something just comes through, right? It's so beautiful. It's like, and I'm like, this is how we can work in the world. This is the way we can be, is we can create together. We can think together. We can ideate together. We can support each other, right? It's really lovely. So yeah, I'd say, looking at myself 4 years ago, I'm a different person. I mean, not in terms of, I think that I always sort of carried a type of leadership, but in terms of feeling really aligned, like I feel really aligned. And I think that even to be able to kind of know that as a type of capacity as well, right? To know like, oh, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And just to keep growing, So yeah.
So beautiful. I love hearing how you're talking about tapping into gifts, leaning into experimenting, living into the work. And what occurred to me was that there's these different there's different things for me that play into capacity building. It's the support, the affirmation, the confidence that we give each other, that we're literally swimming in. Like, we are constantly gassing each other up. I shared at our last retreat, which was hosted at the Garrison Institute, that I think one of the best healing centered practices we use as a team is speaking to each other's potential, speaking to each other's potential and creating that space for us to live into that potential. It's unlike any other kind of team support I've ever really experienced. And then there's this other piece, which is the amazing access that we have to all of these resources to help build our capacity. The network of people that we get to work with and teach with and have as speakers on our summits, and people that are teaching master classes. You mentioned Dr. Zara King. Her and Angel just published a fireside chat on YouTube. Like, this incredible well of resources that we get to not just take in and sit with, but literally be in community with. I think that's something huge that has built my capacity. There's something about access there that I think the Acosta Institute is really gifting so many teachers, leaders, gifting us with. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, access is huge, right? Access, generosity, welcome. That is all like it's just embedded in the Institute. One of the things I continue to marvel at is the way the community keeps showing up. I very intentionally will drop into other, sort of things to just see what y'all doing here, like webinars and stuff, and see what it's like. There's just something about coming together with the people, the right people, that creates a sort of limitless, space. And that's how I feel that we are. And that's that spirit of abundance too. You know how you know that you're doing something right is when people come back and they stay. Because again, when I talk about that organization, the turnover was stunning. It just, and it says something, right? It says something about psychological safety. It says something about belonging. It says something about care, right? And there's so much of that with all of the things we do. I mean, we'll have an event and the chat will just be on fire with a reunion, and people are really able to take what they have access to, what they are learning, and fold it into really amazing and beautiful work. I mean, it's not just changed our lives, it's changing lives. And that's why I always say, when y'all are like, anything you want to say, Drew? I'm like, oh, I'm just so happy we're all on the earth at the same time. And I mean that. I feel so fortunate to be a part of the goodness, the good work, right? And it's just starting. That's the other part about it that's so amazing, right? It's iteration is beautiful. Dreaming is beautiful, healing is beautiful, It's just starting. I remember thinking this year also when we had our AI certification series, and I had the opportunity of interviewing Ari. And I just remember thinking, being in conversation with her, I was like, oh, this is a whole different capacity too. It's just constantly happening, right? Just to be able to lean into or turn towards the different kinds of projects and notice the growth that's there, right? But it all definitely, the timing all had its place. This is why I think internships are so powerful and important, is especially when you're aiming to create new futures. And that's what we're doing, right? We're living into something different. So being able to, join, right? Witness, contribute, learn, reflect. I think that's so important about mentorships. And that is another mark of generosity as well, I think, is like being able to call people in, trusting, right? Trusting that there's something that they have to offer as well, knowing that is another practice, I think, of generosity. And we should be doing that. We should be, I always talk about the Ram Dass quote, we're all just walking each other home. Like, I think about it, like, look at where we are now, and it's just literally a couple of conversations and trust,
Yeah. As you were sharing, I was thinking again about the people in our community that are doing such amazing work, and, teachers that are in their schools implementing healing centered curricula, building healing centered learning environments, school leaders that are part of our community that are finding different ways to support their staff. Consultants, huge. Yes. Bringing this work into the world. So just want to pause and acknowledge all of those people doing this incredible work. The other thing that kind of came up for me was how we both shared that we came to this work and came to the Institute from this place of seeking, right? From a place where we had very little capacity. So how our past environments, you within that organization, me within the school that I taught in, and, public school teaching as a whole, just having this really small capacity, and how that propelled us into this seeking that brought us to this work.
Wow.
I wonder if we could chat a little bit about that connection of like having very little capacity being propelled into this work that naturally grew our capacity to live into our purpose.
No, I really appreciate that brilliant observation, because we can really know it now, years down the line, like in reflection and hindsight, right? 5 for you, 4 for me. Like, yeah, I came here with little. I mean, it's not that I didn't have skills, but when you're talking about confidence and relation and trust, like those capacities, if you don't have those, slowing down, if you don't have those, you can't really get much done. And so it makes me think about, it makes me I want to ask the question of others, like, are you in a space doing good work that fulfills you, where your capacity is constantly just expanding? Or are you in a place where you don't feel that? And then there's what turns us towards seeking the otherwise, right? Like, what turns us towards that? I wonder that for people, if I'm going to be here, I need to know and trust that I belong here, right? That I belong to this community, that I can be myself, right? All of that, which is what I think goes away when you're working in places that, harm, or in places that overwork, or in places that reduce you to hourly hustle, like just all of these, where you're not feeling safe psychologically, like all of that limits what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for those contemplations for our listeners, and for any listener that, you might have responded to that question, no, I don't feel like I'm in a place where my capacity is constantly expanding. Where can you go? What other outside communities, whether that be a community such as the Acosta Institute, friends, family, church, whatever it might be, what other community can you go that helps you build your capacity? So you shared a lot about what stood out to you that was different, that made you feel a sense of belonging. What stood out to me in that seeking journey was when I came to those community groundings. It was the first place where I felt like there was a connection and an intersection between education and spirituality. And I felt that that was so devoid of my whole education career. never did we touch on the spirituality and the transpersonal aspects of being and existing. And so when I was seeking and I found that, that was a thing for me that was like, oh, this is it. This is it for me. Is this where I'm supposed to be?
Well, thank you for saying transpersonal too, because that really is right. There is language for what it is that we are experiencing. We both said spirituality. Yeah. So I think that's a huge point of difference, right? When we're talking about like capacity and we're talking about healing centered cultures and healing centered education, is that like, I mean, from my experience here, it was really about tending to the healers, tending to the teachers, tending to the consultants, tending to the people that are aiming to hold space through such times of such unrest, times of such unknown, times of such chaos. Is that this is where I think that a lot of businesses and organizations drop the ball, right? So it was very clear that business as usual couldn't happen. But what does that mean? Well, what it means is we can't treat people like they're symbols or pawns or objects that can be moved around. We have entire feeling beings doing really meaningful and important work. And so we have to tend to the interiority, the spirit, the heart, that sacred, eminence that is each one of us. And that is a significant, that there's no other way to be in the world. There's no separation. There's no either spirit or work. Mm-hmm. There's no, right? Like, no.
Yeah.
No, there's wholeness, and that is capacity. Right?
So juicy. Yeah. And it's like, we're not so much teaching and offering a thing or selling a thing. We're creating conditions and space for that wholeness, as you named. And I think that's what makes the work really be embodied and lived, because that's what you're invited to step into.
Yes, yeah.
It's beyond words, it's beyond strategy, it's beyond pedagogy even. Yeah, I think that's an aspect of capacity building there as well. The capacity to step into and embody the work that you want to do, or the work that you're called to do in this world. So yeah, thank you so much, Drew, for this conversation, exploring capacity building within the Institute. And I think we touched also on so many different offerings that we've had in the past, the community groundings, the summits, and we're going to have more of those this year. So to any listener, if this intrigues you and you're new to our community, please come check out our work.
Yes, we welcome you.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Drew.